These are the top 10 NBA teams that actually have a chance to win the championship, revisited after the trade deadline moves. In at number 10, I've got the Minnesota Timberwolves, kicking off our first tier of contenders, the doable long shots. Just like the previous video, there are the 3 tiers of contention, and this is the first. The teams in this group can win the championship, but as the name suggests, it would be a long shot. Minnesota lands here because they have the star power with Anthony Edwards, and their defense has been good enough to win them games, especially when the slower pace of the postseason arrives. But the bigger question is on the other side of the ball. I just don't know what they're trying to do offensively on some possessions, and compared to last season, the team's floor spacing is noticeably worse. Julius Randle just isn't the shooter that Karl Anthony Towns was, and that completely changes the dynamic. Randle also missed a good chunk of time, where even though they did have better floor spacing with Naz Reid at the 4, Minnesota still struggled without him. But since he's been back, they're now 3-0 with Julius Randle, and he's put up some solid performances, his best being a 25-point, 10-rebound, 9-assist game versus Charlotte. Even so, his lack of a consistent deep shot makes his fit next to Anthony Edwards questionable. And really, Ant is the only reason this team has a legit shot at contending. He's already proven he can take his game to another level once the playoffs begin, but with very limited pieces around him, worse floor spacing, and an offense that at times looks like it has no direction, I really doubt this team's ability to truly contend for a title, and that's why they land here. In at number 9, still in the doable long shots category, I've got the Memphis Grizzlies. Pretty much every team in this category technically has the chance to win a championship, but I just don't trust them all very much right now. Memphis is in a rough spot. They've now lost 4 straight games, with 3 of those being heartbreakers coming down to the final moments. On top of that, Ja Morant has been in and out of the lineup all season long, to the point where he really hasn't been able to find any rhythm on the season. He's now dealing with a lingering shoulder injury that's clearly affecting his shot, and the numbers back it up too. Over his last 7 games, not counting the 3 that he missed in this 10-game stretch, he's shooting just 13% from 3 on nearly 7 attempts per game, 6.6 to be exact. That's horrific. And his overall field goal percentage isn't much better, sitting at just 37% in that span. This just isn't the Ja Morant we're used to seeing. And honestly, with the way he's shooting right now, I don't even know if he's 50% of the guy we know him to be. But even if Morant does manage to get back to form, that's not Memphis's only issue. Other guys on the roster have been going through shooting slumps as well as of late, and perhaps the biggest concern is how Jaren Jackson Jr. is now also dealing with injuries, as he's been out for a couple weeks. In the time without Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane has had some big moments, but weirdly enough, he's also been somewhat of a liability down the stretches of games. In these big moments, he's had costly turnovers and missed shots that actively led to them losing games. But I'll keep saying this about Memphis. If they can get healthy, they have a shot. But at this point, it would have to take something incredibly special for them to really make a real run. In at number 8, I've got the New York Knicks. Just a couple of weeks ago, they were in my middle tier of contenders, but after their recent play, I think they've fallen off, and here's why. First off, their recent play really hasn't been good, and a lot of that does have to do with not having Cat for some of these games, but for me, the concerns go way deeper than just injury. Defensively, they've had solid moments where they can make it difficult for opponents, but far too often, teams are just attacking Towns relentlessly in pick and roll coverages or in isolation, and it completely breaks down their defense. Against fast, high-powered offenses like the Thunder, Cavaliers, and Celtics, the Knicks defense simply doesn't hold up, and that is a huge problem, because if they want to win the championship, they're likely going to have to beat 2 of those teams, and maybe even all 3. Then to make things even worse, Jalen Brunson just went down with a nasty ankle injury in the overtime loss to the Lakers, and right now we have no idea how long he'll be out for, but what we do know is that they just started a 5-game West Coast road trip, and without Brunson, they could very realistically lose all 5. Meanwhile, the Bucks are breathing down their necks at the 4 seed, only 3.5 games back, and if they're not careful, the Knicks could slide way down the standings, especially with Milwaukee, Indiana, and even Detroit all surging lately. Now, if this team gets fully healthy, they would still be a tough tough matchup in a 7-game series for anyone. But at the end of the day, I don't trust this team's defense to hold up against the NBA's best teams. In at number 7, I've got the Golden State Warriors, who also kick off our next tier, the fringe contenders. Every team in this group is one I genuinely believe can win the championship, but I do have one or two concerns that keep them just below the title favorites. For the Warriors, they've been fantastic since acquiring Jimmy Butler, now boasting a 10-2 record since the deal. He's exactly the Andre Iguodala type piece that they were missing, bringing the ball handling, passing, shot creation, defense, and vocal leadership. Butler is a proven winner, a guy who led two very weak Miami Heat teams right the way to the NBA Finals as their number one option. And now playing alongside a core that's already won 4 championships, how could you not like their chances? But there are a couple of reasons why they land in this tier instead of being higher. First, the team was only just put together, as adding such an important piece this late into the season means limited time to build chemistry, which could become an issue come playoffs. But the bigger concern is the supporting cast. Their role players have stepped up throughout the season, but the playoffs are a different beast. Guys like Quentin Post, Moses Moody, and Buddy Hield have been solid, but it's hard to expect these guys to maintain that level in high pressure moments. That puts a huge burden onto their 2 stars to deliver every single night, and those are the reasons I have them a tier below. But don't get me wrong, I love the way this team competes on both sides of the ball, and their championship experience is a real weapon. They're dangerous, but they're not quite at the top. In at number 6, I've got the Denver Nuggets. They have an interesting case because on paper, this is the same core that won the title back in 2023, led by Nikola Jokic. But something just feels off, and the biggest reason for that is a lack of depth. The bench rotation is almost laughable at this point. I mean, DeAndre Jordan is getting minutes for a contender in 2025. That says a lot. Meanwhile, Julian Strawther, Christian Brown, and Russell Westbrook have not been able to replicate the same impact that KCP and Bruce Brown once had. Offensively though, they're still elite. In fact, the addition of Russell Westbrook has helped them push the pace to the point where they now lead the NBA in fast break points per game. But that faster tempo has hurt them defensively. Denver was already a shaky defensive team, and now that they're constantly pushing the pace against opponents, teams are just doing the exact same thing right back at them. It's turned their games into all-out shootouts, which isn't ideal when you're trying to win in the playoffs. Right now, they rank 19th in defensive rating, and most of their wins are simply coming from just outscoring their opponents rather than slowing them down. And we saw this firsthand in their East Coast road trip, where they simply weren't able to slow down Milwaukee or Boston en route to 2 losses. We all know defense wins championships, and without a real defensive unit, I really don't know how far this team can go, even with arguably the best player in the league leading the way. In at number 5, still part of the fringe contenders category, I've got the Los Angeles Lakers. In my first contender ranking, which I made right after the trade deadline, I controversially left the Lakers out, placing them just outside at 11th. The reason? I simply hadn't seen enough of them yet, and at the time, they had just lost to Utah and Charlotte. But now, with a 15-game sample size, they've proven that they belong. First off, the defensive issues we thought they would have haven't been a problem at all. In fact, JJ Redick has somehow put together a defensive system that has them flying around, swarming opponents, and wreaking havoc, and it's working. Since making their moves, they've actually been one of the best defensive teams in the league, which is wild considering the personnel they're working with. And with the defense being that good, complementing an offensive system that we already knew was going to be elite, this Lakers team has very few weaknesses, except for one: size. That lack of size still concerns me. Even though they've now gone up against elite bigs such as Jokic and Kat and held their own, actually forcing them into bad games, I still have my doubts over the course of a 7-game series, as teams are going to have more time to adjust, study their defensive schemes, and likely find ways to exploit it. That being said, they absolutely have the pieces to win the championship. When you've got Luka Doncic and LeBron James leading the way as teammates, you're absolutely in the mix no matter what. Combine that with just how good they've been defensively, and there's no doubt in my mind that they are legit title contenders despite the concerns with size and bench depth. But it is those concerns that have them just outside the title favourites tier. In at number 4 and rounding out the fringe contenders tier, I've got the Milwaukee Bucks. Who would have thought after starting the season 2-8 we'd be talking about them in the way we currently are? I talked about this in my recent Bucks video, but I really think we could be witnessing a repeat of last season, where the Dallas Mavericks made brilliant trade deadline moves as they brought in better defensive pieces and rode that momentum right the way to the NBA Finals. The Bucks took a similar approach, adding younger, more athletic defenders like Kyle Kuzma, Kevin Porter Jr., and Jericho Sims, and it's paid off tremendously. Since the trade deadline, their defensive stats have been off the charts. 3rd in defensive rating, 1st in defensive rebound percentage, 4th in opponent effective field goal percentage, and 4th in opponent 3-point percentage. And that has translated to wins. They've gone 7-1 since the trade deadline, tied for the 2nd best record in the NBA during that stretch. These are legitimate title contender level defensive numbers, but honestly, this has been the theme for the Bucks all season long. Whenever they've looked great, it's been because of their defense. Now with more athleticism on that end, they've also gotten a boost offensively. I'm not exactly sure what's changed, but the ball movement just seems way better now before the deadline. If you go and watch some of their possessions, it's truly beautiful basketball. Driving kicks, extra passes, and open shooters. And at the center of it all, it's Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now that he's become one of the NBA's best mid-range shooters, defenses have to send doubles to him in the post, which starts the chain reaction of crisp ball movement. It's similar what the Celtics do when they try and hunt mismatches to force doubles, as the Bucks force defenses into rotation out of getting Giannis post-up looks, something they are actually going to be able to rely upon more consistently. So far, they've been running laps around their opponents, but now with a tough stretch of games coming up, this is where their season really begins. In just a couple of days, they face Cleveland on a second night of a back-to-back, and that will be a huge test for this team, telling us a lot about just how legit they are. But as of right now, I have them as the 4th most likely team to win it all this season, capping off the fringe contenders tier. In at number 3, kicking off the title favorites tier, I've got the Cleveland Cavaliers. In my previous rankings, I did not have Cleveland in the favorites category, so let me explain why that has changed. First off, their recent win against Boston was incredibly impressive. They managed to pull out a win after being down 22 points, showing the kind of fight and resilience that you need to grind out tough playoff series. This team is young, but with wins like that, they've proven that they are ready for the moment, and they are peaking at the perfect time, winning 12 straight games at the time of recording. The addition of DeAndre Hunter has been huge for them, and in my opinion, he's been the perfect finishing touch for this roster, leaving them with very few weaknesses, if any. One of Cleveland's biggest advantages is how they've been able to manage minutes throughout the season. Their entire team has stepped up, allowing them to play their star players less minutes over the course of the season. Combine that with their youth, and they're likely going to have fresher legs than most of the competition come playoff time. Then there's Evan Mobley, who's been massive all year long for them. He's a defensive player of the year candidate, while also improving dramatically on offense. That Boston game was the perfect example. He was huge in the 4th quarter, proving just how crucial he is to the team's success. But what makes the Cavaliers truly so dangerous is the way they can stagger their guard big combos. Mobley and Mitchell, and Garland and Allen. No matter who's on the floor, they always have a clear offensive direction. Being able to have a great pick and roll combination and just an elite guard and a big in general on the floor at all times is such a huge advantage. And while Donovan Mitchell's numbers have dipped this season, that is by design. He's playing fewer minutes and taking fewer shots for the greater good of the whole team. But when it matters, he is still that guy. Against Boston, he put up 41 points in their building, and this wasn't the first time he torched them this season. In an earlier Cavs win over the Celtics in Cleveland, he had a 20-point 4th quarter where Boston simply didn't have an answer for him. And that's been a theme. The Celtics have consistently been cooked by Donovan Mitchell, and there's not many teams that are good at defending Donovan Mitchell, but the Celtics have particular problems with this. And that's why I'm starting to really like Cleveland's chances in a potential series against them. And that's why I've got them here. in the title favorites category. Now, in at number 2, I've got the Oklahoma City Thunder. OKC has continued to roll since my last contenders video, with SGA recently putting up 41 points on the road against the Grizzlies. But despite their dominance, I'm actually keeping them at 2. The team's success is built on an all-time great defense. They're historically disruptive, forcing more steals per game than any defense in the history of the NBA, generating 10.9 turnovers per game. That relentless pressure fuels their transition offense, making them a complete nightmare to play against. On the offensive side, SGA has been a superstar, arguably the best isolation scorer in the league, something incredibly crucial once the playoffs begin. The Thunder have also refined their half-court offense, and it's paid off, now ranking 5th in the NBA for offensive rating. Then when you pair a top 5 offense with the NBA's best defense, that equals dominance. And with a guy like Aaron Wiggins stepping up off the bench, this team is looking scarier by the game. So why aren't they number 1? While their offense has improved, there's still one big question. Who steps up if Shea struggles or faces a defensive scheme designed to take him out of the picture? Unlike some of the other contenders, OKC doesn't have a clear-cut second star who can take over when needed. Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams are incredibly talented, but they're still very young, and playoff defenses are going to test them. Can they handle that pressure and still deliver? That is a massive ask, but with all that being said, this team's elite defense still keeps them firmly in that title contender conversation. The number 2 guy to step up would likely be Jalen Williams, who just had a 40-point game against San Antonio, and he has proven to be a pretty good second option this season, actually making the All-Star team. But as I said, regular season play compared to playoff intensity is a completely different story. But if he could really step up as a reliable number 2 throughout this postseason run, the Thunder can absolutely win it all. In at number 1, I still have the Boston Celtics, and for good reason. They are the defending champions. That alone gives them a huge edge because we've already seen them go the distance. Like the Thunder and the Celtics, they both have a top 5 offense and defense, making them the most complete teams in the league. The Celtics' ability to fire away from deep at a high volume has allowed them to coast through the regular season while keeping their guys fresh for an advantage coming into the playoffs. Even though they have been dealing with injuries as of late, with Drew Holiday out indefinitely with a finger injury and Porzingis missing plenty of time as well, they've been able to continue earning wins, with Peyton Pritchard and Derek White making franchise history, somehow becoming the only Celtics duo to put up 40 plus in the same game together, which is a truly mind-boggling stat considering how much history the Celtics have with amazing players. Boston have one of the best supporting casts in the NBA, and in my opinion, they also have one of the best individual players in the NBA with Jason Tatum, who has completely taken his game to a new level this season. Tatum has been a much better isolation scorer this season compared to last, and in my opinion, that's put him into the conversation of guys who are simply unstoppable, as he's got so many ways he'll beat you. As a scorer, he's a great 3-point shooter, can get to that mid-range jumper at ease, while also being a great slasher, getting to the basket for tough finishes. But that isn't all with Tatum, as he's also an incredibly underrated playmaker, as he often runs the point guard for them on offense, as he's really the guy with the ball in his hands calling all the shots. But Tatum's impact on the Celtics doesn't stop there, because they're often asking him to be a big on defense as well, and this is something I feel like nobody ever talks about with Jason Tatum, but in my mind, he is one of the most, if not the most versatile player in the entire league right now, as he virtually does it all for this Celtics team on a night in, night out basis. And I truly believe that now the Eastern Conference is much stronger, with Cleveland being a legitimate powerhouse, Milwaukee being much better this season compared to last, and the Knicks remaining competitive. They are going to need Tatum to play at his best throughout the playoffs, and I just think he's going to deliver. Typically, when we're talking about a reigning champ's chances to defend their title, the conversation often includes championship hangover, but that hasn't been the case with this Celtics squad. They have more motivation this year compared to last, with Jason Tatum being benched in the Olympic Games and Jaylen Brown not even making the squad despite winning the Finals MVP. This team absolutely still has the hunger to prove to the NBA world that they can replicate their dominance against fully healthy, battle-tested teams this time around. And personally, I believe they can, which is why I have them as the most likely team to win the championship this season. But this is by no means set in stone, because there are individual players in this league who can completely take over a playoff series and put a team on their backs. And if you want to hear more about that, you can watch this breakdown now, where I rank the top 10 players who are going to make the biggest impact on the NBA playoffs this season.